All right, so I'm just the focus of this live will be two poems again related to Colombia, again, and this in support of my theory, right, so to speak. I have about a 50-page report on this. The goddess Columbia as basically a cult figurehead, and that really the audience, like the mark of the cult, right? The marks of the cult were indigenous American Indians, on the condition that their indigenous ancestors had converted. So it's like it's a cult for Indians converted onto this European system, right? Remember, 1610, you got mass conversions, Virginia, New England, right? Been over all that. So think about it. You got indigenous people coming on board this system, and follow me. I go into all the atrocious details of the system. So that's not what this live's about. The question is, you know, how do you really get those people? Because you know how you're treating them, right? To transition them onto the system, it's not fun, right? There's going to be they know human psychology so well, right? They know resentment's going to get passed down, anger, revenge, right? So, like at some point, like how did they really get uh the descendants of the converted indigenous to like just they don't have those feelings anymore. Those memories don't get passed down anymore. It becomes not good or virtuous to talk about your indigenous, your Indian, however you want to phrase it, depending on what decade and era we're in, right? Past. I really see this when I read, especially about the 1800s in the literature. Telling there's more truth in fiction, right, than there nonfiction, right? Because things you can't say as a historian or things you can't say as a respectable lawyer or judge or politician of the day, but a writer can say these things and call it, a piece of literature, right? So there's a lot of that with this Columbia, right? It's like, what are these guys talking about? So let's get into it and then go ahead and like what I'll kind of stop and see if anybody has any questions or comments on like what they're hearing, right? Or just any thoughts on like what does some of this mean? Does it like contradict maybe my theory, or does okay it make sense, or maybe there's a whole nother idea to all this? So the first one is called Columbia. This is called Columbia. It's written in 1816. That's significant because that's right after the War of 1812, which is horribly named war. Really runs from like 1812 to 1816, and so it's a 4-year war, and there's a lot, all this stuff, right? But my point is, obviously, the conventional history has underplayed what that war was about. I don't claim to have like this great understanding of what it was really about, but I can tell you this whole Columbia cult writes about it like repeatedly. So there's all this stuff like 1816 to like the early 1830s. It's harping about that war. So all right, here we go. Columbia, Columbia, to glory arise, the queen of the world and the child of the skies. Thy genius commands thee with rapture, behold, while ages on ages thy splendor unfold. Thy reign is the last and the noblest of time, most fruitful thy soil, most inviting thy clime. Let the crimes of the East ne'er encrimson thy name, be freedom and science and virtue thy fame. Wow. Now I'm getting to read it, so it's easier. But if you have any comments or anything, put them in there. But the first thing that comes to my mind is Columbia is called Queen of the World, and yet Child of the Sky. So it's like okay, here we go. The Queen is an adult woman, right? Right. So I just want to make this point. Like they're not calling her the child. They're calling her the Child of the Skies, but the Queen of the World. So I started to feel to myself, okay, so they're kind of are they really copying to America being the old world, right? The older land, which of course it is. We know that now, but they were writing this in 1816. So making that point, but then it says that even though she's the queen of the world, I think what you're saying, she's the oldest land, but she is a child of the sky, like she's a god. She's a goddess coming down from the skies, and she was like she's the oldest one, right? And then it goes into this thing: Thy genius commands thee, with rapture behold, while ages on ages thy splendor unfold. So it's like there's now this genius. So Columbia, the goddess, is compared to a genius, right? So, I've even went into stuff like the war stuff around, I think, 1810, 1812 in Brooklyn, Tammany Hall parade, Order of Columbian Society parade, Order of Columbia tied in to Tammany. It's all indigenous. It's all indigenous people. They reverse what really went on in the convention history. They tell you these people were Europeans playing at Indian. No, no, no. These were Indians playing at European. That's the Boston Tea Party. That's Indians playing at European. Okay. You know what a tavern is? You know why they have all those taverns in New England? Because they outlawed Indian longhouses. So the savvy converted Indians played at being European while still getting to do their Indian thing by creating very long rectangular taverns. Catching the pattern yet? All right. And then it says this, it's like there's a genius here. Wow. Okay. And then it says, we're all going to watch your splendor unfold. So that's a lot of confidence. 1816, right? I thought America still had to be developed. And then it goes on, right? It says, thy reign, the reign of Columbia is the most noblest of time. You have the most fruitful soil. You have the most inviting clime. I mean, listen, this is them at least admitting America, which they're now calling Columbia for some reason, right? That's what the whole point of my investigation into the cult is. Got a 50-page on it. You can go get it. 20 sources or more. I think one of the listeners today, Peter, has actually purchased it. Was it any good? Maybe it's horrible. If it's horrible, take it offline. I'll give you something for free, Peter. So, man, that's a great question. So maybe... right. So what's the saloon out west? Is that the southwestern indigenous version, right? Of the same thing. Okay, we got to play by these rules, so these guys will hang us, right? So as I've really delved into this the last year, made it like a specialization of I love history, but I don't now. This is all I do. I'm not going broad. I'm going very detailed into this area because it's a goal. It's a gold mine of information. It's the facts, and it really shows us a lot, man. And that's a great question. I mean, you got to see what's going on in all this throughout decade by decade. Is your ancestors are adapting to the system that's just it's coming on them, and I'm not. Again, this is my focus, but obviously the overall defenses, the overall military strength of the various nations and tribes of the Americas has been greatly diminished by the time you get to 1492. So that's not my especially is not figuring all that out. But what I can say is by the time you get to the 1800s, your ancestors have centuries of like adapting and adjusting to this system that's coming on them. Because remember, it doesn't come on everywhere at the same time. It comes on in increments, right? So I focus on the United States, as you guys know. You can literally see it go from the Atlantic Ocean, and it's like first they got the coastal, that's the first counties that the first praying villages, and it literally, decade by decade. So you got to remember, none of this was really getting pushed too hard on your people west of the Appalachians till after the War of Independence, right? So that's say 1780. So that's 200 and almost 300 years at that point. And in some way, you got to kind of look at it and go, damn, we were still containing these guys. It's like something's going on is my point, right? Now, for all I know is maybe, there's so much off the books that they're never going to tell us about in terms of the destruction and the death. Maybe there's a whole just bunch of war going on and all that time west of the Appalachians that they're not incorporating into the history of, the United States that they want to tell us. You see what I mean? But man, again, saloons, they just pop up, right? Here's a way to look at that, right? Do we see saloons back in Europe? Is it part of the European culture to do saloons? Therefore, if it exists in America, the Europeans found somebody else here doing it already. And of course, right? That's what, so yeah, saloons definitely likely, the Southwestern indigenous due to the land and topography there and everything. So then they're adjusting. Good question, man. And I'm telling you that I didn't know this about the tavern until I. So here's another thing, guys, just so you understand. Literally, once something became a territory of the United States, you can go find the legislation. One of the first things they basically do is they outlaw anything about being an Indian, like literally being an Indian, like not like your skin color even, but just the things you do as an Indian, the way you farm, the way you worship, the council fire, like they literally, bonfires become outlawed even today. That begins with being anti-Indian. That's an Indian thing. It's not a white boy European thing to go do. We weren't doing that. We came over here and saw you guys doing that on the beach. Oh, that's neat. But we outlawed that, right? The U.S., not me, not my, but I'm lucky. But it came over after. But I'm just saying, they were outlawing like everything, even the way you guys farm. So part of becoming a praying Indian village, becoming an Indian village and especially New England, right, is the way you're going to farm. You're now going to farm mono crops. You're now going to clear all the trees. You're going to farm on the high and dry land, and you're going to fence it in. So those are all laws that are against being Indian. This is real stuff. I'm telling you what I mean. This is overwhelming to me. So it's almost like every law written. I'm not going to say like every law they're writing right now or whatever, but the vagrancy laws, the truancy laws, the idea that you have to be working for somebody or I can put you in prison. I mean, you got to think that one through, at how normalized that type of law was in this whole, it still is today in a sense, right? But back then, even worse. Who brings that? We can go study European history when these same people took over England, and you read the stories they took over. I like the same thing. This is the advent of the sheriff and all that comes with these guys. All that type of stuff comes with these Puritans, with these Protestants and these Catholics coming out of their hives in the 1400s. They bring that even into England. Like even they're like, what is this new thing? And you have all these guards with their dog. Like, you know how they set the dogs on you? I've read how they were setting the dogs on them back in Great Britain and all three islands through all those wars. And people were, they're afraid to go out at night. I mean, again, people couldn't go out at night after a while there. They got rid of the maypole there too. See what I'm saying? All those traditions were called pagan in Europe were very, very what are called indigenous here. And in both cases, this group of people, these colonists coming out of Protestant Europe and Vatican Europe, made all these laws. They're always prohibiting the same stuff. They prohibit the same stuff in Europe that when they took over and they came over to the same thing. It's like totally baked in. Now back to section 2. This is of the poem Columbia. What are they talking about here? This is 1816, all right? What is this person writing about? Who would this make sense to, who's living in the United States in 1816? So once you think through that, who could the audience be? To conquest and slaughter, let Europe aspire. Whelm nations in blood, enwrap cities in fire. Thy heroes the rights of mankind shall defend, and triumph pursue them and glory attend. A world is thy realm, for a world be thy laws, enlarged as the empire, and just as thy cause. On freedom's broad basis, thy empire shall rise, extend with the main, and dissolve with the skies. Fair science her gates to thy sons shall unbar, and the east see thy morn hide the beams of her star. New bards and new sages, unrivaled, shall soar to fame unextinguished when time is no more. To see the last refuge of virtue resigned, shall fly from all nations the best of mankind. Here grateful to heaven with transport shall bring their incense more fragrant than odors of spring. Right? So this is really interesting. He's like basically making this prediction that this land of Columbia, which is the United States, I mean, that's in my report. You can buy it, but I'll just let you know, Columbia comes from Columbac. Columbac is actually an indigenous word. It's one of the words for like the gathering of the peaceful. It's like basically a form of we people. I can't make it up. So they're gonna tell you like it's Latin. Again, it's a great word to say. Where are they using the word Columbia in England prior to 1492? Where's all the guys in England using this word Columbia? I'm telling you, another word made up as special for this situation. And then it gets tied to call Columbia, and so it's also associated with the dove vintage. So, we got this lady Columbia, we the people, the gathering of the people, right? The rights of mankind, the world is thy realm. Sounds like foreign. See, maybe the foreigners, but let's keep going. That's a good right. So we're bringing in people, right? So we got people coming in, right? So they need to right socially control them, make sure they're on board with the whole thing. Of course, what is the whole thing, right? Like as you can tell, very early enlarged as an empire, right? And it says on freedom's broad basis, thy empire shall rise, right? Right, like the name. Go with that a little bit, Washington. And by the way, Washington is very tied into the Columbia poems. I don't think he's mentioned here, but he's anointed as like the priest king of the revolution. If you've heard me talk about this before, it's deep. I mean, it's wild stuff. I mean, have a young black woman who I know has high likely to be a Hostas indigenous elite woman who's literally reading a poem that says Columbia has chosen Washington to lead the revolution. Whoa. Washington from Washita, like the tribe that was already here. Sure, right? So you do have foreigners coming in, so we got to keep that in mind. Let's keep going because I think it's kind of interesting that they concocted it. I think for two groups of people, it's part of like this big meshing going on 18. I think they've really hidden from us. I think there's a lot of more. There's a lot of mating. I've read a lot of literature of the time. There's all these romantic novels that have to do with what? Have to do with Indians and Europeans mingling. I'm telling you, it's like this whole thing. So, very fast. So now it keeps going, right? It's like, oh man, fair science. So, they are making all these predictions. This is 1816, like and then it says all people, like you were just saying when he was mentioning, this will be the last refuge, right? And so shall fly from all nations, the best, the best of mankind. So already, right, 1816, they're opening it up to say, we want to be an empire and we're going to open this up to like mass immigration. It's kind of like what it seems to be going there, right? And they're training people. Like, think about it. Like, they're taking your people back there, training them in European ways. But think about it. Using your people and their different skill sets to train who? The Europeans to start coming over. Yeah, think about it. Think about it. How come the Renaissance only begins really after 1492? I'm telling you what my theory is. They're learning from over here. They're bringing your experts back over there. Of course, all this is under duress. And I'm telling you, it's not just one generation. No. They're like, dude, we understand DNA. Oh, you're a genius and you have kids. We want your kids too. And so Europe starts to start to figure out medicine. They start to figure out plants and roots somehow all of a sudden. Da Vinci's little drawing is like you see the exact same stars, blah 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 thing here, indigenous on the in the mounds. Oh, it's like people were feeding them information. Yeah. What do you think? Or do you think, boom, all of a sudden a group of people that had never shown any knowledge of any of this stuff before, did not develop it in their culture, suddenly start discovering things. Right? And then they suddenly start exploring things, So when I'm growing up, and I'm an old guy now in my 50s, they frame it like this. That was the age of enlightenment. Oh, then we had the age of discovery. Then we had the age of exploration. Then we had, it's great for like telling the story like in a narrative, like mythical way, like to just tell the story quickly and easily without too much detail. But it's actually really stupid, right? Like, I mean, the age of the like things don't we don't just pop up with great ideas. Like everybody knows, everybody knows, like, nobody's sitting in a room like by themselves, and then they just inventing stuff. So how is it like this culture, right? The so-called Europeans just starts inventing a bunch of stuff all at the same time. That doesn't follow like people's experience. Oh man, yeah, right, right. So I don't want to get off topic, but I've read that there's two books or two letters that talk about the fact that I think it was Opequenoghoff, the final chief, was from the Southwest. Like there's so much weird stuff to the Powhatans and who exactly those Indians all were. And by that I would say at the top level, right? We're talking about who's like administering their so-called chiefs. There's at least two, and there's sources from like the 1800s that are like this guy, like even like when they're like could be that when the Europeans arrived, the guys running the Powhatans weren't even Powhatans, I guess is my point. Like something had already happened even by then. So, and like you're pointing out, how is it that there couldn't have been all kinds of nasty battles and wars going on that just not telling us about? They tell us about DeSoto. They say he got killed. They tell us these guys came and went, and then they tell the story. Guys start showing up in Virginia in 1603 or whatever. That's fine. That's just when they decide to start the story. I mean, is it really that hard to believe? Is it really unlikely that they hadn't sent badass like night operators, Templars ahead in the previous century, right? Is it that hard to believe? No, not anymore. It's not, right? Infiltration, right? So, something has gone down. Like you do. That's when you read, oh, we saw this Indian village and everybody was dead, or it was all old skeletons, right? But that doesn't sound like it was like going on all the time. See, that could have been something that they did, right? They came through and they did that like at one time, and it might have been 50 years before. I've read stuff when it's the guys in New England. It's Massasoit, so Massachusetts, right? He's like ready to wheel and deal and cut a deal with the Puritans. And he says, my people have, and basically, I can't remember the exact words, but it's like, my people have, like, I don't think he's saying like, even before he was chief, I feel like it was what he meant. We got decimated. And he said, he says disease. You got to remember how edited all this is, right? So any of the books I'm getting privy to, or most of us getting privy to, they're heavily redacted, edited before they're published. These guys aren't getting to publish the unvarnished truth of what they saw. But they do let us know that there had been some type of death, at least by disease, going on, greatly diminishing his people before they arrived. And I've seen that, I think, 2 different books. So yeah, I mean, fascinating stuff. Definitely something's going on. Let's keep this in mind as I read this next part. You said infiltration. We're all thinking there must be something going on. They're not telling us about a bigger, wider conflict. Again, my focus is family history. Like, that's my business. But this is how it puts it in the context to understand your family history, especially if you're a Black American. You're thinking, man, there's nothing African about us. Like, there's nothing in our code, right? But how to make sense of that. But how did all this come to be, right? Okay, so listen to this next paragraph from the poem, right? He says, again, he's talking to the Colombians, the people of Colombia, which is the United States at this time in 1860. I mean, this name, Colombia. He says, thy fleets to all regions thy power shall display. The nations admire and the oceans obey. Each shore to thy glory its tribute unfold. In the east and the south yield their spices and gold. As the day spring unbounded, thy splendor shall flow, and earth's little kingdoms before thee shall bow low, while the ensigns of union in triumph unfurled hush the tumult of war and give peace to the world. Thus, as down a lone valley with cedars overspread, from war-dread confusion I pensively strayed. The gloom from the face of fair heaven retired, the wind ceased to murmur, the thunders expired. Perfumes as of Eden flowed sweetly along, in a voice as of angels enchantingly sung. Columbia, Columbia, to glory arise, the queen of the world and the child of the skies. Wow, thy fleets to all regions your power Because 1816, they're saying this. Nations are going to admire you. Your splendor is going to flow. All earth's little kingdoms will bow to you. But we'll hush the tumult of war and give peace to the world. Right? And then he says this, perfumes as of Eden. So he's comparing again Colombia, America, the United States, this land to Eden, right? And then what does he say? Columbia, Columbia, to glory arise, the queen of the world and a child of the skies. Again, so the big part on, again, empire, right? Against 1816, Columbia's about empire, projection, and sailing. There's a lot of mentions of sailing in fleets in the naval laws and how they were taking the Columbia. Now I'm getting to this in the next poem, Columbia sailors hostage. So I want to hear you guys think of this, because this is just, you said, who are the sailors of Columbia who are getting enslaved? And what do they mean by enslaved? They mean when their boats got taken, when they basically got hijacked, got pirated, they didn't make the sailors work for the hijack. And of course, in Columbia's always saying it's the British doing it to them. But it's like, what are we saying here? That we're bringing Europeans over from Great Britain to America, to the United States, and they're working on the ships. And then the British guys are now hijacking and enslaving for years at a time the same Europeans. Like, first of all, who would really care? Like, what's the big effing deal? Like, it's like they're all the same corporations coming from Europe. So Europeans taking Europeans hostage on the ships isn't a big crying shame. Stay with me. This is called Washington's birthday. Okay. Again, we were talking Washington's tied in. This is from 1819. That day of all others, that day let us prize, went from the star-spangled azure bright sky. I'm sorry, I got to get it right for this one. All right. That day of all others, that day let us prize, went from the star-spangled azure bright skies. The goddess of freedom came down to the earth to preside at a hero's, at Washington's birth. Whoa. Just going to stop there, right? So what do you got? You got this goddess of freedom. That's Columbia, right? She's coming down from the sky for whose birth? Washington's. Whoa, right? Hail Columbia, happy land. Against all tyrants, let us stand, and let the motto ever be, give us death or liberty. This is 1819. At the birth of the hero, fair freedom she smiled. She owned and she called him her own darling child. In liberty's cradle, this hero was rocked in odious tyranny, dreadfully shocked. Now here's where it gets interesting. Here's what the grievances are. The tyrant oppressor sent forth his command to tax and oppress Columbia's fair land. Again, what happened to the United States? This is 1819. What happened to America even, right? What is all this about? And then it says this, but Columbia's fair sons like heroes arose. So who are Columbia's fair sons? Who like heroes arose, and they hurled death and destruction upon all of their foes. He's saying, they won the war for independence, and then the War of 1812, they, beat the British back again. Who are these people, these sons of Columbia? And it says this, army, army brave, then soon was the word, and freedom then gave to her hero a sword to fight for her own, for freedom's great cause, for the union of liberty with beneficent laws. Here's Washington. The war being over, which freedom begun, and Washington triumphed, brave Washington won. On victory's lap, he laid down his head to mix with the mighty, illustrious dead. Hail Columbia, happy land. Against all tyrants, let us stand. And if we fight, we will not dread to mingle with the illustrious dead. Fame sounded the trumpet, his deeds to proclaim, and freedom re-echoed brave Washington's name. The sound was responded by nations afar, who sang as they worshiped the bright western star. Hail Columbia, happy land, against all tyrants ever stand. Let us all, with sounding fame, the deeds of Washington proclaim. Let the banner of freedom then now be unfurled. Oh, yes, let it wave throughout the wide world. And whoever the glorious bright banner may see, let them sing, let them shout, let millions be free. Wow. I mean, like I said, Washington very much tied in to this Columbia goddess, this cult of Columbia. I believe it's a social reengineering project. I think it's focused on indigenous Indians, converted like descendants, right? There's a lot, I think, where they're at this point where they're trying to get them to become good little small r virtuous Republicans. Remember, this is a republic. Make that very clear. It's like the Estates General back in the Netherlands. They already had their 7 estates with electors, right? So they're trying to bring this over to a people that are not used to this type of system. That's what I think is really going on, as opposed to the Europeans coming over, are especially the upper level managers and higher. They're in the system already. They're like the winners of the system. Now the poor dirt poppers are all sending over as time goes on. They're not so much winners, but they're not. This isn't going to make any sense to some pauper from Ireland or from Europe, anywhere, right? Some villager. So how does this work on him? So this is why I feel like this is a cult and a story and a goddess created by the Europeans who are trying to, use social ways to control and convert and manage this new population onto their small r Republican system, which is very much about capitalism, banking, and law. All right, that's an insurance. That's a huge thing. Huge different way of doing economics. And they got to get some group of people to adjust to it. And I'm just saying, they don't need to get the European people to adjust to it. The European people have been forcibly onto this since about 1500. Go read especially Great Britain. You just read about how that went down. They call that stuff the English Civil War, the war. That's all wars about forcing this new system onto the old, more indigenous, pagan, ancient system of collective ownership of land, local control. So medieval guilds, like local control, birthright, where you're born. You can just kick people off. There's a whole bunch of ancient laws that we're completely unaware of, or most of us are. And I still have plenty to learn on it. But the point is, it wasn't some wild ass lawless civilization like they tried to tell you. Okay, it wasn't. All right. So what they were doing, though, was replacing their whole way of doing things with this new way of doing things. Hence all the violence, all the wars. The wars are the wars of the guys that we now have grown up under, taking over spot by spot, like most of the world. Like, think about it. The whole world's pretty much dealing with the IMF and the central bank, the Federal Reserve. So who are you kidding? The whole world has to buy petroleum in United States dollars, whether they like it or not, until they're willing to fight their way out of that somehow. These are just facts. I'm giving you straight up modern political facts. I used to work at a place called National Security Research too, 25 years ago. I got a lot of facts when it comes to that stuff. Now, you see how Washington's in this, right? He's just, Washington triumph, brave Washington won, right? It's all about Washington, Columbia, hail Columbia, and then, and this is Columbia's fair land, and it's Columbia's sons, but Columbia's sons like heroes arose. Guys, like, I get back, like, who can the audience be? Who's going to feel like, yeah, man, I'm Columbia's sons. This is great. I'm proud to be a son of Columbia. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, I'm trying to think, my own ancestors coming out of Europe, what would this mean to them? Like, they're not, Europe is not, telling its people that to worship, powerful women. That's what you think about what this, but This is a whole, cult religion based on what? A strong warrior-like woman who's going to lead the land and the people of Colombia to empire. So I ask you guys again, who do you think the audience is for this? Like what culture, what groups value powerful warrior-like women? Yeah, thanks. Put yourself in the seat of the guys creating the cult. And they're creating the cult in order to, make themselves more powerful, get things under control so that you have their system, so everybody's got a mortgage, so everybody's paying a tax in single currency, all those things. That's what they want. They actually don't want a bunch of violence. they want to get it in a stable situation, and we're just and we're in that today. We're in the stability phase of all this stuff. Okay. But go back to then. All right. Let me give you some other factoids. Okay. They opened up immigration in the 1790s at the beginning of the decade. So one of the first things they do as a new republic, right? I always want to know what the priorities of the people in charge are. Look what they do at the very beginning of the ruling power. So I tell you, that's why you got to go look at what they're all about. You want to know what the guys who won the Civil War are about? Look at the legislation they passed, why they had all the power during the Civil War, especially, and probably the first 10 years after. Look at the laws they wrote. The laws are their policy for their own interests. So the only question is, well, how is this benefiting their interests? So you can go do a little work, go figure that out. That hard. Usually involves money. And if it involves money, at some point they got to put their name on a piece of paper somewhere, on a will, on a contract, on an LLC, on a board of trustees, on a corporate charter, as a beneficiary of a trust, as an owner of a corporate bond. Because they don't want somebody else. They don't want to have too many agents. Gotta have their name on there at some point. So why would anybody come out? So think like a really important, valuable, powerful person that none of us will ever be, but try and put yourself in their shoes. And you're like, man, how are we going to get this? Now, they write that immigration law in 1790. White Europeans can come over. You know how many came over? Between 50 and 100,000. And those type of whites weren't even probably white necessarily, like I'm supposedly white, but white probably in a legal sense, meaning they got to have property. Like 50,000 people who are on part of the team, not a pauper, not a nobody. Like you're a member of these corporations that were coming over the whole time. I think that's what they really mean by that. You're a white European if you're on one of these corporations, no matter what color your skin is. And that explains why people's confused with black Europeans, white Spanish. They're all white if they're employed by these companies, if they're working for the religious company, if they're working for the shipping company, they're working for the company of the colony of Virginia. They're white, like in just their generic way, just distinguishing things. So I don't care if they're white like me or not. You didn't get more than 100,000. And this guy's writing in 1816. So who the fuck is the Code of Columbia for? If only 100,000 people like me uptook the wonderful opportunity to come to these United States in the 90s. Tell me. Because you have to ask yourself something. Why do they even need to write that legislation if you had a bunch of white people from Europe stream their asses over here for the previous 300 years, guys? Why do you then need, you wouldn't need that. You'd have so many white people here. Why do you now need to open it up to whites once you have the United States and a constitution? You got George Washington in 1792. I think they passed this legislation, and they do that. And a couple years later, they sign the Treaty of Greenville and get all of Ohio. God, we got some new land coming. We better start getting more of our guys in here that are loyal. What? Loyal Europeans. Europeans aren't rebelling against this. We've never rebelled against anything. White Europeans are docile. How can any white? I'm in this. How are we going to say? What do we rebel against? We jumped right into World War I and World War II. Supposedly, you can't make it up. So stop. I hate to break it to y'all. You have never rebelled against anything. It's like you're not. We're completely on board this shit. Especially the ones they sent over here. We're on board with it. They had no choice. That was they were in a business. It's like, you got to act this way. You're you're on. So that's who's coming over, man. Right? I mean, so if only 100,000 of people like me came over when they had this awesome opportunity to come over in 1790s, and I've done a lot of reading. You guys know I read about the corporations. The corporations tell you the stuff in their director. They're just amazing what's out there. And they talk about every ship that comes in and what's on it. And what they don't mention is all these Europeans on the ships. They don't mention Africans either. They don't mention all the Africans coming in either. I mean, you guys know, if you follow me, you know, I have my entire business and my entire just view of all this is based on, the knowledge that they enslaved the indigenous in place. That's what they really did. And they traded you around the Americas, especially if you were male and you were a warrior. That's just common sense. Everybody do that to anybody else in the same situation, right? You ain't gonna sit around and let the warriors hang out on the side while you're hostaging their kids. How do you think? Like, people are always like, man, how come we didn't fight hard? Or how come black people should? What do you mean? When they're showing us, like, they're always showing the Indians in the after effects. Duh. They burn all their food, assassinate a few of the elite, and everybody else is like, yeah, I get it. Oh, that guy's showing attitude. Ship him off as a slave. But we're keeping his son. I mean, we saw how talented his dad is. Yeah, come here. He's at a missionary his whole life. He's at a rich guy's mansion his whole life, or he's at Harvard University. And then they're spitting him out at 21 with all the rights of an English colonist as long as he's in the land of America. And later on, a United States citizen. Over and over again since 1610. So, who is the cult of Columbia for? Since we don't have a bunch of records showing all the Europeans they're bringing in, I can tell you right now, at the most, they had like 2,500 in the 1650s in Virginia on their own official count, because people were 50% death rate. Nobody wanted to come over here, except for the top dogs. The top dogs were coming over here, just trying to, that. But all those other, that's why they're either warriors, or either knights and warriors, or they're just, for the most part, like these useless bodies. They didn't last long. They weren't bringing over like these small. That's the other thing about the buildings. Like, I haven't read where they're bringing in a ship of masons. That would be noted by the company. I would be finding company, West Virginia company, talking about how they are all subscribing to purchase masons to send over to build the fucking building. You know why I know they do that? Because I've read conversations where they're all subscribing £100 to maintain an Indian kid as a fucking hostage in a ward of a guardian for the entire fucking life as his little black knight, his little knight errant, his little knight esquire, a black knight. You know what a black knight is? Not a black person. It's a person of great lineage that you've erased. You've blackened their lineage. And they were blackening every elite kid's lineage. Get that English name, take that English Christianity, got to work for the English corporation that enslaved you. I mean, they didn't enslave you, right? You weren't enslaved. You were a ward. You were presumed to be incapable, incompetent of functioning in the system until you went through that gauntlet. So if they've been doing that to your ancestors since 1610, then 200 years later in 1810, who are they writing this cult of Columbia for? With its powerful warrior, indigenous American-like mother goddess motif. I mean, she doesn't even get whitened until the 1800s. And it comes right out of that, the America and Amerique, right? It's like a warrior goddess. And you can go right now, you can look in the capital of the United States, and they have two very martial warrior like paintings of her. And sometimes they'll call her Freedom, same person. That's that. I think freedom's for the Europeans. They had to change it to freedom, and Colombia was for the indigenous. And I think it transitions more to about Lady Liberty, right? Lady, and then Lady Liberty is really the bookend on the whole thing. Lady Liberty's the cult rebranded for now the mass of white Europeans coming in after the Civil War. So now you got to have a lady turning outwards towards all these Europeans, welcoming them in, and that really nice. She ain't there with this, and she ain't there with the arrows and the shield anymore. The cult had completed its run. It had done its job. It was another movement concocted, right? Concocted to manage people. And now they had a bigger, massive group of people to manage. More of my ancestors coming in, right? And right. And you see how it changes on a dime. You go from what I'm showing you now. That's kind of the origin story right there of the goddess Columbia. Very much like I'd almost say like Amazonian, like warrior princess. Yes, I'm sure they sent the Great Sun, and of course, to Haiti. I've been learning about how the Caribbean islands is basically where. So that I mean, and it makes perfect sense. They're literally sending all the baddest ass people from a military perspective to those islands, just like they do now. They put people on what? Alcatraz. They put people on what? Island fortress prisons, man. It all starts to add up. That's why you can have that Haitian revolution, right? Because those were a bunch of warriors. That's why you're having the big battles were always in the islands. It makes a lot more sense now, right? All these uprisings that were like quote unquote successful in whatever way they were, right? Ultimately, but where so obviously where was the muscle? They didn't. That's almost right. I think they put that was just a whole. The Caribbean was just Alcatraz for your warrior class, and I think they were also on the ships. I think there's something going on. Your people were great on ships. I think they somehow, again, the ships got high. You know, you can naval battles. They take entire ships. They don't even burn them. They take them over. The ships are valuable and they use them. Right, right. So when you're reading this stuff in the Columbia poems, I'll read another one. It really gets into it. It's like one of the big gripes is that the king's ships are always taking over our trade ships or our corporate ships, and they're enslaving them, and basically they're making the ships work for them. That's all that's really going on. And this is just irritating. This is like the big, this is big. This is huge. And this is where liberty and all that stuff keeps coming out. I had one because man, a guy really like kind of weighs in. I was like, whoa, he's talking about all this enslavement. And he's talking about enslaving. I wanted to point it out to you because where is it? Okay, there's one called the Late War. Just so you know how big the War of 1812 must have been. They're not telling us. There's another one about Columbia. I'm about to read some from it. It's a poem, or it's written like in the style of the Old Testament. Okay, which is again like, okay, who were the what were they saying about most of the indigenous? Oh, they act like the ancient Hebrews. So why is this poem about Columbia is called The Late War? And he's talking about the War of 1812, and it's literally written in Hebrew Old Testament style. I'll start with it. Now it came to pass in the 1812th year of the Christian era, blah, blah, blah. And it goes on, you should hear this. Even James, whose surname was Madison, as in James Madison, delivered a written paper to what? The great Sanhedrin of the people, who were assembled together. Oh, so you're comparing in this poem the United States Congress to the Great Sanhedrin? Again, who's this aimed at? Who are people, right? I know some include Jews, right? Right. Okay, if you think there are a lot of like Ashkenazi Jews running around here at the time, show me that. But I do know we have a lot of people who were speaking Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew still. I do know they were still using Hebrew letters. They were still practicing ancient, all the agriculture, right? And you got this guy writing about Colombia, and he's using what? Old Testament Hebrew motif. So who's this? Who's the audience? Who's the audience? And get this, you're mentioning Washington. In the name of the city where the people were gathered together was called after the name of the chief captain of the land of Colombia. Well, here we go again. I thought George Washington was president of the United States. Just saying. Cape Haiti. Yep. See, you don't. Sorry about that. So if you have any more this one, what do you think? This, and then again, Washington, and he's the chief captain of the land of Colombia, not of America, not of the United States, of the land of Colombia. Okay. It's like somebody, like imagine you're back in high school or something. If your teacher read this out, and just one student would be like, "Yeah, what is this even about?" Like, who knows? I don't know. What's the land of Colombia? How come nobody told us about this? Right? Now this just keeps going on. Okay. So here's the grievance, guys. All right, I'm going to now finally get to the big grievance again. It says this. So again, they're talking about the causes of the War of 1812. These are the grievances, and it says this: inasmuch as they, meaning like the king, inasmuch as they permitted not the tall, interesting, right? It says they permitted not the tall ships of Colombia to sail in peace on the waters of the mighty deep, saying in their hearts, meaning like the British people's hearts, the spoils shall be given unto the king. Then it goes on, inasmuch as they robbed the ships of Colombia of the strong men that wrought therein and used them for their own use. So the British, they would pirate the ships of Colombia, and then of course would put them to work for their own use. And he says it like this: even as a man useth his ox or his ass. So, right, the slavery invocation there, right? Or connotation. And he says this, because this is the Greek, and I want to see what people think. Like, were the indigenous still sailing? Like, we know like I take this as the old world now in an ancient. So it's like, how did they lose their naval capability? And who are these people in Colombia that are great sailors as of 1816? And it says they kept the men stolen from the ships of Colombia in bondage many years, even against and caused these men of Colombia to fight the battles of the King of England, or Great Britain, really, even fight against their own brethren. Neither gave they unto them, meaning these enslaved Colombian sailors, neither were they given silver or gold, but many stripes. Then it says this: now the men of Colombia were not like unto the slaves of Britain. Okay, right? Neither were their backs hardened unto the whip, as were the servants of the king. Therefore, the Colombians murmured. Their murmurings have been heard. Who? Okay, let's think about this for a second. He says this: once the British would have the men of Colombia in bondage, in other words, taken over their ships, and basically they're taking over their trade, and they're going to use that ship to go trade around the world, keeping the men as the sailors. That's what's going on. And it says that the British then caused the men of Colombia, who are now working as sailors for the British, to fight battles for the king, even against their own brethren. All right. Who do you think he's talking about? Who are the Colombian sailors? He's saying that they would get taken hostage, work for years on behalf of the British owners now of the ships, and even be forced to fight the battles against their own brethren. Are you telling me that they were taking European men who had migrated over to America? Now, remember how they were really migrating over, especially with these ship type, the part of the ship industry. They were migrating over as part of a company. So different today. It's so similar today to like when Goldman Sachs opened up, banking offices in Hong Kong in the 70s or whatever, or in China in 2000, or when IBM opened up, some factory to, have the Chinese build. You see what I mean? IBM goes over there, but who does the work? I'll give you a hint. The Chinese. The people that were already there do the work. Yeah, I want you to think about it. One might even say IBM and Goldman Sachs and all these factories, when they first went over to China, they enslaved the Chinese in place. But look where we are 50 years later. Is that not possibly an analogy for what happened with the so-called revolution and then the War of 1812, where they kind of have a tiff again with Britain Parliament and the East India Company? I mean, if they are really converting people en masse since the beginning, but and they're IBM tanking. Well, I mean, I can't believe IBM's still down, man. I mean, the IBM today is not the same IBM of like 20. When I worked there years ago, and at one point, I think a guy who worked in their mergers and acquisition team said they bought and sold like 20 companies a year. It's basically a mutual fund. So it's general. All these companies are mutual funds, unofficially. Anyhow, so yeah. So I just want you guys to think about it. Like they tell us the history like it was all super violent and it's all, and I'm like, if you just stop and look around today, the same shit's going on today. That's why you can see so much high civilization in history at the same time you're reading about something, you know what I mean, that seems like so savage or whatever. So again, what do you really think they're having that? So does the guy who works for IBM, he goes over to China, him and some top level managers. Do you think they're going to turn against IBM anytime soon? Are they the ones who are going to revolt against IBM and say, IBM, we're kicking you out and we're taking over the factory? Or do you think that's likely to come from the indigenous who are doing all the work, right? Well, Colombia, right, is an indigenous word meaning the gathering of the people. It's also associated with dub, is spelled with a K, like they do all the time. They switch up one letter. Colombiac. Yeah, it's amazing. That's why there's Colombias all over the Americas and there's none back over there, because they didn't have a Colombia back over there. I don't care if you're going to show me it's in Latin. That's great. It's in Latin. I want to see somebody actually using the word Colombia over there before they came over here. You're not going to find it. That's because it's an indigenous word. Just like you never heard the word hammock until they came over here. Humak was an indigenous word for where you'd hang out and get respite and get rest. So is Yankee becomes Yankee. It's not the Dutch. That's just like thinking that the Swiss make chocolate. The chocolate's not indigenous to Switzerland. Yet they're the most famous chocolatiers, supposedly, right? So, think about it. You gotta start thinking about this stuff. You got these guys, if you haven't figured it out yet, they have not been out to tell us the truth. For like, I don't know, 200 years now. So, like you think about it, it shouldn't be this hard. If any of you work in corporations, I don't really anymore, but I used to. As I was kind of leaving it about 10 years ago, they were coming up with that idea of the OST, right? The one source of truth, the OST. Oh, Johnny down the hall said we get, we can get reimbursed for all the booze we consume on our corporate travel. Oh, okay. Well, let me go look that up at the one source of truth. What is the company policy? You would think we would be sort of like that with some form of like, not history, but documenting the past, I'll call it, because history is just a technique of documenting the past. See, once you start to think of it as that, like I consider myself a past investigator, a real PI, right? I used to call myself handsome history because I was like just trying to play on that idea of like that, grizzled crime scene guys, just like I've seen it all before. It's the same old thing. It was the ex-wife who was banging the gardener. No, but seriously, like it's a crime scene. No, nobody's there to like, oh, let me tell you how we took over things. Let me tell you how I really got to the top of the company. Let me tell you how I really got. It's like, do you really think they all started with on their mom's couch? Oh, goodness gracious, come on. So who are these people that are fighting against their own brethren? You're telling me that they're bringing Europeans over and then they're all having a tussle and then they're enslaving each other. And that's what the cult of Columbia is about. Or is it they've been enslaving the indigenous in place the whole time? And that includes their mariners. And that includes taking over their ships. And that's why you're reading all this shit about liberty, which is a whole thing about naval law, which is why you have certificates of freedom, with actually treating the indigenous as stateless assets, the way you might find some fucking floating cargo in the middle of the ocean. It's, hey, finders keeper. Yeah. Why are they applying maritime law to how they're setting up counties and taking over with their land patents, setting up jails and forts at the same time with the orphanages? It's a playbook. But one of the things for sure is they're using maritime law. I mean, it just doesn't add up. What adds up, what makes more sense to me is they were enslaved in place, including the mariners. And what's really going on is some mariners are going, hell no, we want to work for ourselves. We're done with this shit. And some are going to go continue having, getting it's like, I'm going to stay with IBM and get the good pension and the good 401k and make $250 a year. And Johnny over here, though, he's going out to Silicon Valley, the fucking tech startup, to try and become 100 gazillionaire, right? Whatever his deal he thinks he is. So he's going to break away, right? I mean, really. Those are why you have brethren firing at each other. And they fire at each other. A later thing that they actually cop to and call it the Civil War. Intrafamilia. What family are we talking about? Because this guy's talking about the people of Columbia, the land of Columbia. And I just, as a descendant of Protestant and Catholic Europeans, we ain't got any fucking understanding with badass matriarchal goddesses. We're not. Yeah, no. If the white Irish that may have been here at the time, they're going to be talking about what? The land of their fathers, the land of their was fucking Ireland. And that you actually see that in American literature from the 1700s, 1800s. The Europeans, the few as a percentage that really were over here, yeah, they're like longing for, So, okay, they're not longing for Columbia. They're not from this land. It's crazy. I mean, the truth. You got to go read the fiction. You got to read literature. You got to read the poems. They tell us stuff. And as much as they robbed the ships of Columbia of the strong men, oh, you're telling me that Great Britain all that time was sending over its best fucking sailors? And then those sailors revolted, and that's the revolution. Then they're fighting again in 1812. It's just white guys versus white guys. That was really that's what we've been taught to believe. And somehow this cult of Columbia that they're reading in every school, in every Sunday school, it wouldn't even make any sense to the European. None of this makes sense to like that average European that would have been shipped over here. So who does it make sense to? And they kept these men stolen from the whose are the ships of Columbia? I mean, I thought we had ships of the United States by this point. It's 1819. What the fuck are the ships of Columbia that are being taken in bondage for many years? In other words, the ships are getting hijacked along with the mariners for many years, and then being forced to fight, of course, against other ships of Colombia when they come in the trade route, fighting against their own brethren. And then it says this, these men of Colombia, I mean, you see, is this a giveaway? I got to take a drink. I'm having water, by the way. Listen to this. Who are these men of Colombia? Well, the author says this. Now, the men of Colombia were not like unto the slaves of Britain. So these men of Colombia were big and strong and had ships of Colombia. They weren't like the British slaves. Now, who are the British slaves? You think he's talking about they went and got some West Africans and put them on these ships and they're fighting battles? No, man. He's just saying the mariners are Britain, right? Wherever they're getting them from, because by this point, it's the 18th, they're getting them from Hindu. I mean, they take skilled labor wherever they can get it. You understand what I'm getting at, right? So they're literally building these fleets. So when you read about the Pirates of the Caribbean, these so-called Huguenots, yeah, they got their own guys, of course, but they build the fleet by taking over pieces of other fleets as they're doing their business all the time, going back and forth, right? So who are these men of Colombia that aren't like the guys from Britain? Because I thought it was a bunch of British blokes that came over here into what became the United States and were sailing all the ships. How can they not be like, what do you mean? They're all British, right? And these Colombians, unlike the British ship guys, the Colombians weren't used to the whip. And so here's the king when they get taken over by the British admirals can whip them. Again, if I'm a European, I'm getting whipped. I'm already getting whipped. I don't need to announce it. I'm not even going to go against it. I'm already there. So gathering of the people in peace, the doves associated with peace. So like a lot of indigenous words is not really a word in the English sense. It's a idea that can be, that, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of the opposite of English. English uses many words to describe something. The indigenous uses one word that puts the whole encapsulates it all. So you don't have to ba. That's why they talk about the sardonic indigenous. Typically a lot of, they didn't talk too much. Just saying what I've read, what was noticed by the Jesuits, not that they're good, they would just notice that, like, yeah. Kind of interesting. Think about. Well, yeah, you're going to hear that because they don't want to tell you who really built the country. The guy's already here. That's just not a good story. That doesn't inspire the 16 million immigrants they brought over after the Civil War. See, that's the big source of modern white European Americans is all post-Civil War. And that also happens to be when Colombia gets shelved in favor of Lady Liberty facing outward, welcoming who? White. Now white Europeans, like for real, white Europeans coming over. And a lot of them, they weren't even giving them white, right? They're like, those Italians are black. Those French, if you're from the Riviera, if you're from the Mediterranean, they're like, that's a swarthy, that's a black man, right? So you got, so keep all that in mind. Well, they were. That's what they want. The whites that arrive after the 1860s who don't know shit from Shinola, right? They don't know anything. That's why people really don't know anything, because their ancestors weren't here. Nobody's passing knowledge down to most white Americans right now from 1750 or 1650 Virginia. Yeah. And they might be white now. They probably weren't white in 1650. So that's a whole other thing. So who's this Colombia, man? What's really going on here? If the men of Colombia aren't like the men of Britain and they both are really good, badass, skilled mariners, right? Then who the hell are they? Where are they getting them from? Oh, they're bringing in Moroccans. Okay. They would have a whole paper, the one paper trail they don't ever want to show us is how they heisted all the indigenous through the guardianship system. That's the certificates of freedom comment. You can see where people got taken over. So wow, I mean, this is just pretty wild that it's okay. One more thing about the sea, right? Because again, it's the big issue, like the big issue of this whole cult, and it goes on. And even when you read Revolutionary War history, it's really about the Navy. It's really about the seas, right? It's really about ships and being able to move goods and the power of the ship and the navies. It seems that's like the big thing. And so here's this cult of Columbia. What is it all about? Naval power. Naval power. What is its big fear? Its big fear is that the sons of Columbia will work for the King of Britain or put their shit, like LeBron James, they will take their talents elsewhere. They'll take their talents in their ships to the British East India Company, to the corporation, the King of England, the Royal House Corporation. That's what they're worried about. Unless you can tell me it's a bunch of Moroccans who might go do that. And so they created a cult in America to convince a bunch of West African and Moroccan. You see how hard that at this point, I'm trying to get at the most likely scenario. Like, what is really most likely, given more and more of the receipts we have, of the receipts we do not have. Like, we do have receipts where they brought in all these African slaves. We do have receipts they were bringing in all these white Europeans. They're not, just like there's no big bunch of procurement documents for all the African, there's not one for all the supposed white Europeans coming in. The settler growth numbers were going up because they were converting indigenous people who, upon the age of 21, had all the rights of an English citizen as long as they were in the land in the colonies, which means they didn't have English citizen rights when they visited England. See how that works? When you're hostage and indigenous, you're going to take them back to England and raise them there. You're not going to let them have the rights of an English citizen there. Oh, come on. No. That ain't happening. Hence the word Yankee, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Who's the Yankee putting a feather in his cap? Oh, that's a European coming over and culture. No, that's an indigenous American who's gotten on board with the system, put his indigenous feather in his cap as like royalty, as being an elite person. And the elite English Europeans are like, you ain't nothing. You can be the richest converted indigenous Yankee American in the world, and you're still not equal to some pissant European guy who has land, but he's in debt over his eyeballs and he doesn't have any cash to even, like go to McDonald's. Again, let's get back to likelihoods. Everybody, if you think what I'm saying is like really off, go watch some videos about how the British colonized Hindustan. Go watch how the other way, okay? Why would you think they do it any different here? Every time it's all about forcibly converting the elite, of course, killing and assassinating who are on board, right? It's all about that, and then turning those elite into the vassals. King Herod during Jesus' time. Most famous one. This is like the Normsy of empire building. Right. And there is Roderick, kernel of truth in that, right? Because they took the indigenous and enslaved them in place, and they were building the country before these Europeans even came over. Unless you think the Europeans just came over and started sharing these arts and skills with them. Kind of like the European came over and taught them how to grow oranges everywhere in Florida. Okay, boss, you're right. Oranges aren't, there's no way that Florida is the origin of like the first orange ever. Not Florida. No way. It literally has the most unique scent in the world called the Orange Blossom Special. But no. That's how you always get something better. You take the original and you bastardize it, and then you get something better. No, man. The reason the best fucking oranges were here and had the amazing scent because it was like designed to grow right there and create that scent when they try to replicate it like back in Iberia Doesn't work. Yeah, we just keep going with all this stuff. Horses too. They want me to believe that the Spanish came over with a few horses because you know what the biggest Spanish settlement was, St. Augustine. You know what the top peak amount of colonists was? 2,500. Do you know how expensive horses were? Do you know how expensive it is to bring them over? Do you know the only people that have horses in Europe are the super rich? Do you know that in America, they're talking about horses being everywhere? Like in the first year, man. In the first year, the Jesuit guys writing down like there's a bunch of wild horses. So you must believe that they figured out how to like fucking exponentially mate in like 5 years a bunch of fucking horses. Yeah. I don't know why this isn't just. I don't know how that is a thing. And then when you tell me you can't find horse, you're not going to find horse bones outside of very cold places. So you got us. You're not going to find a lot of human bones outside of the very. So I guess nobody was alive in the coastal regions. They're all just alive in the Arctic and in Alaska. This is what, guys, I've done deep dive on the whole horse thing. You should go read it. Do a deep dive on what was the original study about horses not being in North America. You should go read the studies. They're so minute. They cover less than 1% of, like, basically nobody's really ever tried to prove it like seriously. So if you're going to tell me they've never had horses here, but I read that there were fucking wild horses everywhere and the Spanish were stealing the horses. They were stealing the horses that were already here because they needed fucking horses. And they weren't bringing enough over. It's like right in your face, written in the accounts by the guys on the bad team. They're just right. Because when they were writing in 1500, they weren't writing to trick you and I in 1980 or 2020 fucking four. In 1500, when this guy was writing, he had a whole different agenda. His agenda, though, wasn't to fool you and me that horses were really here when they really weren't. No, that definitely wasn't Padres' fucking agenda. Now, some historians' agendas since, say, 1880 might have an agenda to tell us all there's no way there are any horses here. The Spanish brought horses, and damn, they brought oranges. For whatever reason, some historian in the United States put those two stakes in the ground, and they're sticking to it. It's like this is our history, guys. This is how history's been done. Go deep dive on the horse thing. All right, we're talking about they're up there looking in Alaska, and you know what they do to test to validate that theory? They go back up to the same site every 5 years and do the radiocarbon dating. That is not testing out a very, very heavy theory because it's a very big thing to say that. So you should have a lot of proof. Kind of like if you tell me you brought over gazillions of slaves from Africa, you got to have a lot of proof because I know it takes a lot of work, money and people and communication and collaboration and all kinds of things to pull that off. So I now treat history like this. Just because it's coming from the so-called accredited people, if they're proposing something that is very improbable, they should have to provide a lot of evidence. I mean, I'm not saying absence of evidence means, but come on, man. We're in 2026 on some of this stuff. Yeah, they did the same thing. They take their sons back to, I mean, this is literally like the way they've been doing it like forever. I think what became the United States got the worst of it. My theory on that is you got the worst of it because you are actually the origin. The Mississippians, the whole side. I really think. I mean, it just starts to add up. Like, who got the worst of it? Who, when they were really thinking of black, when they really would use that phrase "negroid," when when they're starting to use that word in 17, 18, who are they? What type of melanated? Yeah, the ones you see in the South and then the modern Caribbean, because they were taking your warriors from the Southeast, right, and shipping them to that's why there's some similarity in look. I used to live in Miami, so I'd see the cross, the cross section, people coming through there, and so a lot of people from the Caribbean, a lot of people from the Southeast around, and so I just started to notice these things. That's all I'm gonna say. A lot of similarities. That's all. So doesn't even things like that maybe make more sense? Like isn't what I'm saying more likely logistically, militarily, financially, just human wave movemently easier to have moved people that were already here around here than it is to say we brought 6 million here or whatever it is. And the way they still claim the 12 million into Brazil, 12 million guys, that's a big number. Like, God, man, there's got to be then a couple hundred slave ships they found with all kinds of shit in them, because that's just how many ships. Like, I mean, just if even just 1% of the ships go down, 12 million. I'm trying to divide. Say you can take say 100 and survive, right? You just got to divide 100 into 12 million, and you get the drift of like what I'm saying, right? And I can't even do that math right now, but that's a lot of fucking ships. I think it's 120,000 ships, right? Or 120,000 trips. Put that in the chat if you do the math for me. But out of 120,000 ships, you would have 1,200 wrecks. Just this is why you can't take this history, like, even if they like when I deep dive on George Washington or some of these guys, I'm thinking they might be mixed indigenous. They can always put together some paperwork 200 years ago easily in the estate, say, oh yeah, who. So you got to judge by like behavior, by culture, by artifacts, right? And of course you still look at what's been read, but you have to, I'm just saying, you can't just, if you really want to understand the past, you just can't read about it. You can't just use the written word. You can't just use the written words. My point. That's all. Yeah. Oh, right. I didn't even think about that. Right. Because it's Portugal. Right. I mean, and Portugal is pretty busy. They had a lot of stuff going on. So where did they get the resources for all the extra ships? It's not like they were just. A great point. Well, there you go. See, look at engineering. Right. That's a great point. So there's no deep water. Right. So I have a theory on West Africa where you see about the Igbo. Oh, they have similar culture. I'm like, yeah, but you're reversing it. They were reverse slave trading so many indigenous over there. That's why I guarantee you that's what you'll see. Plus, like the indigenous, if you go back, to the ancient times, we're already going over there. So we know all this was going on. We know there's all this back and forth. And maybe what happened is some big schism happened, whether it's war plus climate or whatever in the 11, but something happened, right? And all of a sudden, I feel like you just had, I feel like we might actually be around like 1,000-year war, because I look at things like this: 1066 invasion of the Normans, right? What are the Normans? They're this new thing in Europe called knights. Well, at the same time the Normans are doing that, the Teutonic Knights arise in northern Germany and Scandinavia. And they start fucking killing everybody and forcing them to become what? Christian, to become what they're calling Catholic in the history. I wonder what those people look like in 1100 in Great Britain that they were pillaging and plundering. I wonder what those people look like. And who were the Teutonic Knights fucking smashing? Their own people? Own white people? I mean, let's assume they're white because that's what we're all taught to assume. So the Teutonic Knights of Germany arose. They're a bunch of white dudes. You said, let's get together, form this thing. We've never done the knight thing, but we're going to start doing it now, baby. And what first thing we're going to do when we form it is we're going to kill our own people. So where do we go from here? Sounds like they were doing the same stuff to people in Europe in the 1100s. And it takes them about 500 years to do what they did in Europe. And that's why you have 1492 is Columbus. That's when they start, quote unquote, expelling. That's a cover story, I believe. Now it's a cover story, the expulsion of all the Jews and Moors. No, they were reorganizing, restructuring, and launching the invasion. They were finishing off your remnants that were still in Europe. And that was the so-called wars of religion. Really, who are the Catholics that they're going after in the 1600s still? They started making them become Catholics in 1100. See, in 1100, they're pagans. So what do those pagans look like that they're forced to become Catholics? And what do those Catholics look like that they're trying to force supposedly become Protestant in the 1500s? Or we just have phantoms and duplicates. It does sound like the same story repeated 500 years apart. So who are the Colombians? back to the topic. Hey, these wars fell hard upon the people of Colombia. And the King of England of Great Britain said, ye shall come unto me and pay tribute, and then may ye depart to another country. Now these things pleased the pirates and the cruisers and the sea robbers of Britain, because they could then rob with impunity the commerce of Colombia under the cloak of British honor. Furthermore, have not the servants of the king leagued with the savages of the wilderness and placed in the savages' hand the destroying engines in their hands, thereby stirring up the spirit of Satan within the savages? That's the unconverted American Indians. King of Great Britain still doing work with them, deals with them, and these guys running the Columbia cult hate that. They hate the unconverted Indians. They hate them, and they hate the King of Great Britain. This time, I think it's still House of Hanover, the Georges. Britain in her heart has commenced war against the people of Colombia. Now shall we independent people of Colombia sit down silently as slaves and bow our neck to Britain. I mean, what? It doesn't make sense that the British are turning loose their British guys to then pirate their British corporation ships that are now operating under this new, government, right? Well, I don't. They're saying that the British are forcing the American ships to port in England, pay like a tax, and then they can then go to the rest of Europe, go over to the Mediterranean, head over to China if they want to, whatever. Breton bringing British. Yes. Right. Right. So when they sit there and go, we just don't know what the Druids didn't write anything. Yeah. Just like the Indians, they had no written language until I read some book, that basically the first Spaniards were like, dude, they got like 20,000 books in the library. They're using, that's like paper. You guys had the papyrus here. I've read it. The guy's talking about how you had type. He wasn't talking about handwritten scrolls. I'm telling you what they're finding in 1500 that they're copping to. So why does the printing press, along with other things of the Renaissance, not begin until after they've seen a printing press in what they're calling, Mayan and Aztec, case? They're just saying 20,000 is a number. If you don't believe me, you can find books in the 1800s. Guys that are Harvard, they're memory antiquarian. Nobody's like questioning it. They're literally just relaying the books written by the friars, by the monks, the so-called scribes. Why would they make that up? Why would they do anything to glorify the civilization of the indigenous? So why would they make up, oh yeah, they had 20,000 scrolls and it was like, and the guy shows you sketch of pictures. It's like they totally had, ink block. How hard is that? Dude, they had purple dye. You don't think they figure out how to take the dye and like dip stuff in the dye and then put that dye on something? Maybe they tried it on rock, wood. Then somebody said, shit, man, we can, some of these plants, they're like a little more malleable. Let's put okay, well, that was getting kind of cool, right? Oh, right. Just like we do now with shit, right? Like if you get a chance, right? We improve on stuff. White, black, right? It's just whatever type of human you might be. One thing you typically kind of want to do is you can't help yourself. Is there a better way to do this? That's all. Right? So why all this is realistic. So if that's what's going on, if you have a 20,000 person library, how can people not know how to sail over here, guys? I mean, they cop to the gigantic barge canoes that are like 100 feet long. I read the books in the 17 and 1800s, and the Europeans like, yeah, the guy captaining the boat on the river is three Negroes, as they'll call them. One Negro is an Indian working for a white man. But I can tell that boy, because they're not getting whipped. He's talking about how they're sitting there, and like the white European French guy, he's the proprietor. He don't know how to steer the damn ship. This is before steam, by the way. So what, you telling me they're just oaring down the rivers and then they get to the Gulf and they just stroke. I mean, come on. Oh yeah, Algonquin, absolutely written. I mean, of course, there's all written. That's why these guys are coming over here and writing the translations. It's how did this stuff ever become history? Or they didn't have a written. It's like so bizarre. Anyways, what are all the tablets with? I mean, what hieroglyphics are? That's an alphabet. That's a language. You know, the Paleo Hebrew. It's just like the alphabet. It's the same, almost like same number of letters and stuff. Yeah, it's just wild. I mean, it's something. You know, my theory on that, just so you know, my theory on the history of United States history is that the Civil War was won by a certain group, and I don't want to get into it right now, but that group had complete power from like 1870 to like at least I'd say World War One. Okay, so that's 50 years of like kind of absolute power. Uh, and that's when that's when the history that we're kind of that is pressed on to us, it begins to get written. So that's when I believe that's when all of a sudden the indigenous or the American Indian, that you just start to disappear in the history, in the culture. It was just white people. It was not even the Huguenots aren't even black anymore by 1900. Even the Huguenots are white. So something's going on after that war, and if you tie it to the implementation of kindergarten, which is white Prussian Germanic idea, they begin to create a military that is based on the Prussian model. Okay, so if you look at the names of the generals in the north, they were importing generals from Saxony and Prussia. You got all these Civil War buffs, and you can go read Ken Burns and listen to that shit. And I bet Ken Burns never told you what I just told you. If you don't fucking think, it's really important to know they had foreign motherfuckers leading the troops of the Union in the Civil War. If you don't think that's an important tidbit, you're then just don't even do history, man. Just go watch talk shows. Yeah, it's fucking huge. I don't talk about it. Not only did you have Prussians, you had like the great grandkids of Louis the 14th, the Bourbons, who were persona non grata during the Civil War in the 1800s, um, are hanging out at like three battles. There's newspaper articles about it. So these are the things people, you're not gonna. There's no history book that'll ever have enough courage to like put in writing what I'm saying. Even if they did, it's not gonna. You can publish whatever you want, but if it's not going to get promoted by the the mainstream, nobody's going to know it anyway. So who cares? Like if a tree falls in the forest, nobody hear it. Why bother, right? So that you just got to realize, like, just certain things are never going to be spelled out for you in our system. And so at some point, like you got to curve back your naivety about what you're reading, what you've been told, what you see. And I'm not saying everything's opposite. I'm not saying question everything. I'm saying question things that are questionable. Right? I mean, I'm just asking people to question things that are questionable. I'm not saying question. That's stupid. I don't question everything. Sky's blue right now. I'm not going to bother questioning that. I got more things, there's enough questionable things for us all to focus on that really matter, that I just encourage people to focus on those questionable things and think to ourselves, we ought to get to the bottom of this. Yes, sir. Clausewitz. That's right, my man. There's some. Yeah, I went to West Point, so I know all about Clausewitz. I think I had to read, had all military history. Yeah, so exactly. So that stuff is heavily Prussian, Saxon, Hungarian. It comes out of there. It's very much your knightly orders are very much of that same sort of organizational style and kind of soulless, just very Spartan like way. That's what I think comes over after the Civil War, and that's where you see a big time change in the history books and what's considered respectable to say and all that. And one thing that becomes you can't say is that you had a bunch of Indians working in the Southeast that had been actually having quite a bit of power behind the scenes in all this, and that's what had been destroyed and dislodged by the war. Okay. And the real enslavement of them begins after the war. This is how they spin things. The 3/5 compromise. See, doesn't the 3/5 compromise make a lot more sense if a bunch of indigenous American Indian employees, skilled operators in the Southeast are enslaved, quote unquote, enslaved in place? They're in place, still producing in abundance and they've put over administratively this European banking corporate trust bullshit, and all those guys have mortgages, but the bank can't really secure the collateral because the fucking indigenous aren't going to turn that over. Hence, the state of Mississippi, the state of Louisiana, and a few other southern states stiff their legislative bonds, right? So in that case, they actually had bonds that were backed by the slaves and the plantations, but it required the legislator to enforce it when they didn't pay back. And of course, the legislature didn't enforce it. So who was the legislator influenced by? Who is influencing them? Why do the Southerners in the Constitution be like, fuck no, you got to count. We got to get votes for these guys. These guys got to get the count. Why is that? If they were a bunch of skillless Africans, like that would be a laughing matter. That would be stupid. But you know what? If you're taking over people and you're like, well, I mean, golly, they really know how to do everything. So it's like, we got to give them some power. That's my point. It was like, the reality is the Europeans didn't want them to have any political representation, but the indigenous in the Southeast were so powerful at the time that they forced them to count them as 3/5. That's the 3/5 compromise. It's indicative of Black, American, Indian, Southern power at the time of the Constitution. Then you can go read the 13th Amendment and start to realize that's when they actually legalized slavery. It literally says you can enslave someone upon due process and they're asking thrown in the prison. All that comes in to the South after that Civil War. So before the war, you were like 3/5 weighing in. They had to hear your voice. They had to give you representation. After the war, you're in chain gangs. You can't go on the roads without passports. You have to show that you're working for someone or they can just grab you and put you in jail. I can just go on with this. That wasn't going on before the Civil War. So these Colombians, I know it sounds like it's not connected, but who are these Colombians? I mean, here's one more because it's weird. Here's another from a poem. "'Tis my mandate," said she, "be my orders obeyed." This is Columbia speaking, the goddess. "'Tis my mandate," said she, "be my orders obeyed," meaning you got to obey my orders. "In the hearts of Colombians, the groundwork be laid." "'Tis my mandate," said she, "be my orders obeyed. In the hearts of the Colombians, the groundwork be laid. The structure will soon be complete in its parts. If Colombians, the groundwork's embalmed in your hearts." Social engineering. Whose hearts are they trying to get into with this stuff? "My mansion," this is Columbia speaking, "my mansion, when built on foundations so sure," meaning the work has been embalmed in the Colombians' hearts, "through ages you shall last and forever endure." And here we go, Washington again. "And Washington shall be the great, and Washington shall the great architect be, disordered by heaven and sanctioned by me." Again, another poem where this goddess is sanctioning Washington. He's like the priest king of the revolution, of the early republic. And then it says this. It's just an interesting refrain. "Ye sons of Columbia, then join hand in hand, resolve to support what so happily planned." So they're planning the revolution. "Resolve to support what so freely is given, the wonder of ages and the bounty of heaven." So there you go. Again, right. So the typical way of the 3/5 is they make it like, like this horrible thing. But what I'm saying is, no, it actually represents, the North didn't want to give indigenous, nobody wanted to give unconverted, not on the system indigenous, any political power. And the slaves were technically depolitical. They didn't have political. That's the way they phrased it to it. They formed, but they did, because who else? between them and the Europeans managing them, they're like, yo, man, we got 4 million. Yeah, we want that to count. We need that to count for our political power. You see what I'm saying? Yes, it's like a rap song. Right. I mean, well, there you go. It sounds like a rap song. Who was this cult for then? Right? Exactly. I mean, I can keep going. It's it's very poetic. I'm sure there is a book. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's a book maybe about Colombia. Almost all the literature I'm seeing about Colombia, exactly. It's poems, it's rhyme. I mean, it just keeps going. And it's like, exactly who are they talk? Okay, you guys, you got to stay with me one more, because he goes into animals here, and I want to see if any of you can interpret this with maybe. So he says this. He says, "Save from a few who, full of wishes, fain would have grasped the loaves and the fishes." He's talking about people that didn't want to fight the revolution at this point. "And such there are in every state, themselves alone would elevate. Thus, while over the realm presided, the minor offices of state confided. To others he considered just, who'd prove deserving of the trust." Right? This is called The Lions and the Delinquents, a fable. Again, it's a fable about the states, right? And this, or I guess at this point, colonies. So let's listen to how this poem talks about them. Okay, the colonies. Before he goes like this, he says, "The ape, the tiger, monkey, bear, of weight of government they bore the share. The ape, he of the council named, the tiger was a soldier famed. The monkeys, with their chattering jaw, appointed counselors at law. In truth, it yielded no small sport to see them practice forms of court. The peace to keep he gave the care, as constable unto the bear. I'm sure you could not help but laugh to see how the Bruin shook his staff. The foxes justices were made, the jackals were made, the lords of trade. The hound with nose for scenting fame, attorney general he named, judging that by his scenting nose he'd smell out treason where it goes. The lynx, forsooth, with eyes so keen, was in the court chief justice seen. The leopard chancellor was made, the wolf as sheriff was arrayed. The ass he made, whose voice so hoarse is, a muster master of the forces." So the wolf as sheriff musters the forces. "'Twere needless others now to mention, or have recourse to invention. Matters a while when passing well, till unexpected scene befell." And then he goes on and on. So there's just a lot there. There's a lot in the 1800s. This poetry, people that well, right. So he actually mentions the trust there, and I was reading something the other day where it actually in their writing, it was talking about indentured servants, and it distinguished two groups of indentured servants. Indentured servants that were like low skilled, like just getting grabbed up off like out of the pauper jails in England, and then indentured servants of the trust. So when you read their writings, especially the corporate writings, their religious writings, when they're writing about their accomplishments, because those are the books I read. It's really interesting to read a book written by the Methodists like in 1850, and they're literally telling what they think is the great history of how their Methodist people came over and forcibly converted. See, this is how you know they were converting. It was all enslavement in place, because when you read the churches themselves in their own little history books about their history here, this is exactly what they're telling you. This was all the rage to convert you. I don't know how so that's what gets hidden after the Civil War, right? That starts to go away. But if you read these books written in the 1800s earlier, they're just talking all the time and how they convert this Indian, and he became a reverend himself, and then they sent him out to convert. It's always talking about how they're redeploying converted Indians to go convert other Indians. So who are the missionaries? Yeah, it's just, yeah. So, right. So birth certificates, right? So I'm glad you're bringing that up. So, right. So what's the transition from indigenous? There's what I call transition points from being indigenous, which means with your sovereignty, with your jurisdiction, right? Okay. Having like, or your own people having control of their economics, their taxes, of if somebody steals, how you handle, whatever your laws are, right? So that, how do you go from that to now you're getting produced out after going through the gauntlet. You're one of these citizens, right? What do what do they do for that? They give you what? The baptismal certificate. So for you who are of indigenous ancestry, if you're looking to start trying to track some stuff down and really just, and this ain't about proving it one way or the other, right? Now, maybe if you're not sure and you want, that's fine. But my point is, these types of documents exist. The ledgers exist. They had to keep accountable. It's very important because when they gave you a baptismal certificate for an adult Indian that had been forcibly, you could be a 30-year-old Indian man, head of household, so to speak, and your entire village has converted, and everybody's going to get a baptismal certificate. That's when you would see when somebody went from an indigenous name and an Indian name, they're also on that certificate going to have what? Their new English name. They're truly born again with the baptismal. You see how the American Christianity is very indigenous influence, all the heavy emphasis on water and baptism and cleansing. That's ancient indigenous Hebrew spirituality and rituals. You're not going to find a bunch of stories of them dunking a bunch of white guys back in the Thames River in London. You're not. I mean, you probably find one or two, but everything you're going to read about going on in America with conversion is always about baptism in the water. And it makes sense that in the springs, right? In the artificial lakes, and the lakes that would be canaled up to connect to rivers. It was such a aquaculture, it's all part of like the ruse. Like I believe it's the spiritual warfare. They concocted a Christianity that, would be of attraction to you. Of course, they're trying to force it on as well. But again, if you look a Protestant in America, especially the evangelical and the charismatic, that stuff does not exist back in Europe. It only exists here. So what that means is either Europeans came over here and started acting different, and the way they acted different just happens to be the way that indigenous Indians were already acting in their different type of, I mean, at some point, like, what's more likely? So yeah, birth certificates, just like baptismal certificates, put an adult into a trust. Then the birth certificate is we're getting you into the trust from the very beginning. But think about it, right? You're not ever going to have that birth certificate unless one of your ancestors got transitioned on as a after they were born, which means you're only going to find a baptismal certificate as their origin point into the system, or as elders saying, the trust, which it is. The United States is a trust. I personally haven't researched or found, like, is there a charter to this? The Constitution is not a charter. It's not an Articles of Incorporation. So I'd be curious about that, but that's what all this is. All your churches, each missionary was like was part of a bigger trust, and they might cover the whole state of California. So the Methodists would create like they call it like the conference, the Methodist Conference of California. And that's like the organization they set up as a trust organization, because what trusts are is they don't operate and produce things. They administer things. So if these guys are administrative experts, who is doing the work that they're administrating? Right. So water was big. And I believe also just you guys were often just, there was a lot of ritual and ceremony. And I'm imagining also just, what we might call today leisure or fun, just like good time. Like at some of these spaces, there's multi, uses, but they were all, though, definitely about gathering around water, right? And you see the sketches and drawings in all of these Christian books about their history of missionizing the indigenous. It's typically the reverend standing tall with the body of water behind him, indigenous either crouching or starting to kneel, like they're like agreeing to it, like they're at the point of fine kneeling, and then of course the next step would be you're going to go into the water and all that, right? Yeah. So the doctrine of discovery, right, it falls under like a lot, right? We're talking about, right? And it's like they literally could discover Indians. They could discover your village, and they could get you to convert. They would get all kinds of income based on controlling your labor. That's why I call it control the labor and control the land. In combination, you can administrate a banking system, a sheriff system, a paramilitary system, right? A legal system. So you can intertwine all that and run the entire society at a minority. If you added up all the police in America, all the judges, they probably doesn't come out to like 1% of the population. If you added up the military, even it might be 5%. So I want you to think about that. This is shit I think about when I'm driving long distances. This is a country of 350 million people that's basically bossed around and managed by about less than 5% of the population. So and that's 350 million. Your people were decimated when all this history that they write starts. Let's give you 30 million tops. Okay. And they didn't try and manage all 30 million of you at once. Remember what I've said? This was incremental. They started on the East Coast. It's always on the coast because that's where they get their foothold, right? So they were doing what happens to 350 million of us today. They were doing like village by village, county by county. That's why when you read in the books written by the churches, because they're the ones who would tell you how they were doing all this, because they were the corporations in charge at the time. And so when you see, they'll always talk about the setup. You got to have a jail, you got to have a courtroom, and you got to have an orphanage. And of course, that's all wrapped around the fort. So what is it? It's a militaristic law enforcement presence from day one, set up to intake indigenous children after what? The expected carnage of killing and assassinating a percentage of their parents. It's all big. It's in the plan. Orphanage, jails, a judge. They're not even talking about setting up a market to take in all the crops from you. What's interesting is what they don't write about in their article that they're setting up and what's important. What, they don't need boats, canoes, they don't need shipping. I guess all that's taken care of, but they need a jail. Now, do they build the jail? They take over a castle. They turn it into a jail. That's why you got the most amazing jail buildings in the world over here. And many on islands, right? They turned them in to jails and to keep people in. They used to be to keep people out from invading. They're turning castles and forts into your jails, sending their sheriffs over who doing just like the sheriff of Nottingham shit. So, so what color really was Robin Hood? So is Robin Hood really the indigenous? He's the remnant. He's the vestige. He's the remainder of still swarthy, truly Celtic, ancient, he's a fox. He's brown. He's portrayed as brown, swarthy. Burr fox, Burr rabbit, right? Think about it. He's robbing the new wealthy people that have come in and taken over England. 1200s England. 1100 Normans. By 1200, you got Robin Hood. Who's Robin Hood really pissed at? I mean, again, like they always try and portray it as like, oh, those rebellious, those Christian Europeans are rebelling. It's that rebellious spirit, Braveheart, American Rebel. We rebel. No, we don't. I'm just going to speak for my people. We don't rebel. That's why people get all crazy about stuff that's meaningless, because that's how they get their rebellious outlet out of it. They rebel about meaningless shit because they don't want to get hurt. And I'm not like a guilty white guy, man. I've never had a race, so it's not like I'm saying. I observe cultures, my own included. You guys, I lived in Miami. I got my comments about the Upper East Side Jewish culture. I got my views of the Cuban culture. I can distinguish the Cubans from the Puerto Ricans, and both of those from the Argentinians any day of the week. The Argentinians are snobs. I get it. I get the whole thing. I lived down there long enough so I do it to myself as well. And I know that's why culture is a great thing to look at. You got to ask yourself, and the history book says, all of a sudden, this group of people started doing something. They invented something. They found something, and their prospects got better. They advanced. Right away, you got to go, all right. somebody either came in and took them over and they're telling the story this way, or like, you know what I mean? Like, no, you know, the European doesn't come over and like start doing stuff that he didn't do back in Europe. Unless he's learning from somebody not from Europe how to do stuff that's not European. Like this is that's the only way it works, man. It's the only way it works. Like if you live in the United States, you just need to really observe that yourself. Look at immigrants today, right? And that's the whole thing, right? They cling to their nobody's like showing up in the United States. I mean, they have to in public to keep their job. You know, we all know what's going on back, right? Come on. So the same thing was going with indigenous that are getting forcibly converted, right? They're still talking, they're still passing down stuff in their family, but they got to represent in a certain way. They've been forced onto this system in 1610, in 1650, in 1700, in 1740, 1780, in 1800. It's like underground stuff. Well, the dump the versus stuff and all that, again, look at the timeline of that, right? 1452, huh? 1452 is right around when the Constantinople goes back to the Turks and the Muslims and all that, the Ottomans, and in exchange, basically at the same time, the Vatican gets Spain. No, I got to get more details on Robin Hood. I'm just giving you my like surface level analysis of Robin Hood. I've never even researched. I'm just saying, if you look at the timeline when they tell the story, the king, they try and make the king that good. Think about the whole story, like as I think I understand it, right? The good King John. Well, King John's not a good king. He's a Norman king. He's a post-Norman invasion king. So the good King John of the story ain't even that good. But we know he has evil sheriffs. That's the Norman system. That's the knight system. They bring in the sheriffs onto the pagans and they force that upon the so-called English Saxons, all that stuff, right? Who's Robin Hood's real nemesis in the story? See, they got to make it look like, you know, somebody's on the good side in Europe, right? But really, Robin Hood would be against King John and the sheriff. For crying out loud, they're trying to say King John left to do what? Go kill people in the. So he's the good guy, and hit his replacement, or you know, the guy that stayed. I forget how. Right? And guess who? Who is the bad king's advisor? It's a snake. Who's the snake? What civilization is the snake? The indigenous American Indian is the snake. Is a serpent. You're still calling yourself. I can read the poems and literature in the 1800s. It's not just the Aztecs or just the no. It's not just no. I'm talking Massasoit. I'm talking Mohegans who were calling themselves the Serpent Kings. What's Robin Hood about? I mean, you got that. But it just seems like the real story to be those guys are Normans. They brought over this new system of, you know, super heavy, what I call like this is the beginning of real capitalism. And who's revolting against it? Well, who would have the power and who would have the skill, right? And my view would be the people of the land. And if you follow just enough of the story on that, these guys know how to operate where? In the lowlands, in the swamps, in the forests. Like they're people of the land, and they happen to be painted as animals, and the leader's a swarthy brown-skinned fox in the cartoon. So yeah, and then you got a Francis Marion known as the Swamp Fox in the Revolutionary War in the Deep South. In the conventional history of the South, they're going to want to try and tell you that's some Huguenot French guy. You're right. I'm sure, you know, it's not even about color. I don't care if he's a black French Huguenot. What experience does he have operating in the lowlands and in the swamps and knowing the land of the Carolinas at that time? Zero. So who's the Swamp Fox? Why is Robin Hood a fox? But yeah, the serpent thing too. It's like, so I don't know, like what, you know, it could be the serpent thing and Robin Hood is just from the cartoon, nothing to do with it. But certainly, you know, it just sounds like the same setup you actually have in America when you read about, you know, they'll try and talk about the folk living off the land. You know, the folk that go into town and they get some food and they got to skedaddle out for the sheriff gets to them. Well, once you know that indigenous people who didn't want to be on the system couldn't use the roads anymore, couldn't use the bridges, couldn't go to the shipping ports, you couldn't like go inside the boundaries of, so boundaries, like village and town boundaries, actually mean something. They really meant something back then. So you're like, shit, man, I got to go into town. We need some bread. We want whatever we didn't have, whatever you got to get, a tool. Yeah. They're going to look to snatch you up. You better have your passport paper. What's your passport? Certificate of freedom. Literally your freedom papers. So let freedom ring. Liberty and freedom for the people of Colombia. Hey, man, if you work for us on the ship, we'll give you a certificate of freedom so you can be at liberty on our roads and our highways and our rivers and our bridges, and you can go drink a beer at the tavern. That's actually a long room where you're going to conspire with your indigenous descended friends to take us over Futamini Hall and other things. I mean, I really think that's what's going on, that you guys are converted and on the system and pulling power plays, and it ends with the Civil War. It ends with the Civil War. That's why you couldn't get New York right. They weren't going to fight the Tammany Halls in New York. So they're like, we ain't fucking fighting these guys. Those are our guys. We're not the exact same guys, but we're not. I'm telling you, that's right there in the history. So it's open to interpretation why you couldn't get, but I know it's the same time they're kicking out all the American Indians out of that area, out of Bronx, out of Brooklyn. That's what they're showing you in the Gangs of New York. Watch the fight scenes at the end of the Gangs of New York, especially like the last 20 minutes. There's a whole bunch of African slaves involved, or freed African Negroid looking people involved. I got to hand it to the director. They put you guys in. they leave it open to interpretation, but once you know the entire historical context, he's showing us that what's going on in Gangs of New York is the white Europeans, the truly white, light complexioned Europeans now that are coming in the mid 1800s, are taking over this turf and kicking out who? Ex-African slaves from the South? No. Dark-skinned, swarthy, black Yankees. I mean, converted. It's 1850 when they're showing. So you got New York indigenous descended people in 1850 who could be descendants of. Don't you see what I'm getting at? Like, it happened so long ago, and you guys are still holding it down in the system. But then something comes in. I'm telling you, the mid 1800s, and then you get the Civil War, and now it's a whole ball game. National currency, national banking system, income tax, just the way they treated everybody. You just got to read. You can go read the stuff from the Freedmen's Bureau. The way they basically militarized a military occupation for a good 20 years, and it wasn't a friendly one. Right? And then they take all their land and their paper wealth with the Freedmen's Bank, and they all go from owning the land and being duly employed, quote unquote, enslaved, yet somehow having tons of money and wealth to put into the Freedmen's Bank. Right? Yeah. So you see how it's stupid, right? So the Civil War is to dislodge the remaining unconverted indigenous American Indians and what became the modern United States boundaries. And that's why it makes more sense based on their mass converting, mass employing, enslaving everybody onto the system for hundreds of years prior. And that strange old South, that antebellum South, that nobody just seems to understand what's really going on. They don't understand what's really going on because the history wasn't a bunch of white Europeans writing history, because it wasn't a bunch of Europeans in the Deep South the whole time able to write that history. What do you think about that? Because it's indigenous history. Their history got burned or they've hid it. Smarts. I mean, think about it. Hey, how come we don't have a lot of written history about the United States South? Well, I mean, we gave 3/5 of the, so man, I mean, they got all this wealth to put in the bank. They're slaves, but they count 3/5 of a citizen towards political power. So that makes the states that they reside in more powerful, huh? Interesting. If I like don't read what a historian tells me to think, and I just like read the facts, I start to tell, I can tell a different story. Oh, sorry, I got to keep going. New York, yeah. So I mean, the gang in New York. So I'll circle back. So I'm going to connect Gangs of New York back to Tammany Hall. Gangs of New York is basically showing you the end of Tammany Hall. And what was Tammany Hall? It was Indians playing at being European, United States political stuff. It wasn't Europeans playing at being. What the hell would that matter? Hey man, we're the guys that just took over everything. Can I dress like you? And I don't understand how that, like, I get that at a stupid frat party, but we're talking about Tammany Hall and the Society of Cincinnati, as well as the Columbian Society. They had a Columbian Order of Columbia behind the cult of Columbia and the goddess. And that Columbian order overlaps organizationally and people-wise with the Society of Tammany. And Tammany itself is a fucking indigenous chief's name. Sorry for my cussing, but see how annoying this gets? Like, you start going, okay, how have all this stuff, how have they twisted the story so much? Again, it goes back to the end of the Civil War, who's in charge since then. These guys are super powerful. New York did not want to fight the South. Hence, all the draft riots took place where? In New York. Because they were like, yo, these guys got to go kicking on good, and we do business with them. See, everything was just fine between the New York's blacks in the Southeast, so-called slaves that we know are black. Interesting. So knowing that, what does Gangs in New York start to look at, since it basically happens right before and up to the Civil War? And at the same time, Kansas becomes a slave state to start. Why does it become a slave state to start? Because indigenous American Indians who know how to run stuff in the Southeast are putting companies together of 100 and 200 employees, slaves, and going out there and setting up shop and starting up. And there's a whole history to that, where Massachusetts sends a bunch of white paupers out there and they foment civil. That's the first Civil War. They're shooting at each. Who do you think shooting each other? You think a bunch of white Europeans are shooting at each other over slaves and free in fucking Kansas? I mean, sure, you got white paupers putting guns in their hands and giving them liquor, but you think they're telling them to go shoot white guy? So you got Southeast. So, and then if you know the Trail of Tears, which so many of you have told, and your culture told me about that, how they go out there and start rocking in Oklahoma, which is a really dry place. I lived there. They start rocking Oklahoma even after getting disbanded and hurt and beat up in the Trail of Tears. They were going out there and doing it in Kansas in 1850. See, they're not telling us that, like, the whole slave state, free state fight. It's your people. They're going out of the South, and as soon as they're already there. And then the United States gets a hold of it as a territory, and that's when the friction begins. Oh, and now it's one of our territories, and guess what? Every territory writes first day in office, black codes. Can't do business. You're a black man. You got to have a white European be your guardian, be your ward. He's got to vouch for you. He's got to go down to the courthouse, notarize, saying this is a good black man. Let's let him come in here and do business. So is that a ex-African slave black man and his group doing that? Is that what we think? I mean, they're not writing black codes to keep out unskilled, powerless black people. You don't need laws against the powerless. You don't need to spend a bunch of time on the powerless. Like, you know. They're going to be destitute. You just round them up. You can put them over here in a village and give them, and then they're okay. No, we're talking about they're writing laws against movers and shakers. They're writing laws against movers and shakers that are so-called black. Well, who are the movers and shakers? And that it's such a problem that whether you look in Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, every free state before the Civil War had black codes. Everyone. In the North, they get rid of slavery, they write black codes. Well, who are the black guys that they're making to become paupers and shit after they take their land? You got to go register as a pauper with the county. Another route to knowing when your indigenous ancestor was forced onto the system. You have no more birthright. And we don't care about anything about your past. That you become a pauper, you're done. Certificate of freedom, you're done. Birth, baptism certificate, you're done. You're a kid. Your parents got their baptism certificate. They're on board. Your birth, done. In. Beautiful. From a like machine perspective, clever as hell. And right. Of course, yeah, you having tons of acres. And so what would happen is you would get the acres, but at the county courthouse, you know, let's just use the man. Just say the Indian man's name would be on there, but then it'd be two white European or approved whites, right? And of course, those are probably that's probably the source of your law profession. Why it gets so big here? Why is the law profession so huge? It's not huge like in Asia. It's not even huge in Latin America. It's only huge in Great Britain and the United States. It's not even huge in like Germany. It's not huge in Russia. It's not huge in Italy. It's not. Is it huge in Spain? Yeah, no, it's not like what you have here. So what is that law thing? They set up the county courthouse with the judge. What's the judge doing? He's reassigning orphans to approved people, and he's reassigning and reallocating your lands to approved title holders. You're getting a title to Indians. You're getting a title to their lands. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians. They're literally telling you that they were discovering stateless assets, right? I told you, maritime law, you are a stateless asset. You're using our roads. Got you. The sheriff pops out with a gun and a pistol and takes a family of 4 downtown. You can't pay. If dad wants to get feisty about it, they'll just make him legally a slave, which means they can now ship him away from his family. So he'll probably pipe down and agree to either not convert but continue working on the farm, or he's going to go through convert as well, and that way he can be near his children. So they hostage the entire family. You guys got to understand when you're they're and then later on that's just the so-called black help. The black you see. They're taking over entire families. So that's why I do Frederick Douglass as a case study. Not only is he famous, and not only did the recent legal and DNA analysis prove him to be indigenous, but it actually shows his entire family, his ancestors and his entire family were hostage. One line was able to get over to Delaware where the laws were a little different. And another, literally like one sister, one maternal went that way, one that way. The one that got stuck in Maryland, right? What they do is they become their guardians, but they only get to become their guardians because the state legislature wrote a law taking the remaining thousands of acres of their land on the eastern shore. And in the history, you can see that what they then forced them to do is they all had to go register as paupers. And then what they did upon registering as a pauper, they're letting the European trust funders know, hey, we're giving up our claims. We're not going to fight this anymore. And then they gladly became the guardians of the adults as well as the children. So this guardianship thing, that's why, who was Frederick Douglass writing for? Who is getting to keep his earnings? All these people, who are they working for? As adults, they can still be a ward, a dependent of one of these trust funders. And that's going to be your reverends. That's going to be all of your judges, all of your preachers, priests, reverends, all those guys, sheriffs. What do you think? Sheriffs still have their boys thing. Like they still collect kids. No offense against law enforcement, but you got to admit, like you look at stuff like, what are you guys even involved in like youth Florida Sheriff's Ranch for? The fuck does sheriffs should have? Just conceptually, philosophically, there shouldn't be any overlap there. But there is, right? That's culture. That's tradition. What is all, they've been running prison camps and concentration camps for they literally call them work camps in the post-Civil War South. What kind of work do you think was going on there that they were having your freed African slave ancestors perform? Now more of all this context. Come on. They were just doing to you in the South what they'd already had been doing in New England and the Northeast and what became the Midwest and the West. That's why when I read California in the 1850s, they got bounties for scalps. They got to kill so many Indians and get so many scalps that they got to issue bonds. They got to issue bonds, and the banks are going to forward them the money, and it's going to be backed up by the lands that they take while they're scalping. And they need that money for the scalps because there's so many scalps getting turned in at the different county sheriffs and judges. They promise payment, so they got to have the money on hand. You think so, again, like at what point do we just go, okay, the normal thing, the predominant thing, if somebody is melanated in this history, they're highly likely, like 90% likely to be indigenous. And we should tell the history that way. That should become the core assumption, rather than the core assumption is that the 10% were the 90%. You see how they reverse things? It's a matter of perspective, or a matter of how they weight things, and its perspective gets distorted. And I believe this Columbia thing is just all part of it. It was a big thing. Begins in the 1770s. It's there, and it's a big part of like the what you might call the public the exactly right. Yeah, exactly. Listen, I keep it focused, but exactly that's exactly what I'm going for, right? It's like, dude, people, this is what I've realized too. History repeats itself. That's because the people in charge repeat themselves. They repeat their stories. You think about it. And they also repeat not just their stories, but their operations, their system. It's a franchise, standardized model. So you're seeing it. So it's like, yeah, history keeps repeating itself because you got the same type of culture in like groups and institutions practicing it and honing their skills and and repeating the process. It's like they're repeating the process again. Right. Yeah. So I'm going to close out for now. It's been a couple hours, a little longer, but thanks for joining me. Any comments maybe here? Again, this isn't stuff that you can prove like in a scientific lab. I'm just trying to tell you. You can find, there's just a lot of literature. Columbia, it's very cult-like. It's very domineering. Like, you have been bad Colombians. You have, like, it's very Old Testament. So it has you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much about it and about the way it's presented that makes me think the target is indigenous people or people with indigenous, some mixed heritage, because this whole thing just isn't going to make much sense to a heavily indoctrinated European Catholic or Protestant of the 1800s who's coming over the very patriarchal society is what I'm trying to say. Women are definitely at that time, very much pushed down. And you can see that in the laws as well. They couldn't own anything. So why would you show them and their families a powerful woman when they got here? But if you're dealing with people who come from a lineage, thousands of years lineage of what? Matriarchal authority, right? The queens behind the kings, right? The woman behind the great man, the right? Sitting in the councils, choosing from their families the various chiefs for just like any society, right? You have so many industries, you have so many things to do. Yeah, right. It just seems someone who is a great grandson or a great granddaughter of a full-blooded indigenous American Indian, and how the traditions, we know how it works, right? We see it just in especially in modern times with immigration, because we can just see so much on TV or like, people retain their customs. They hold on to their customs. I just have to believe that in this situation, you weren't even immigrating. So you weren't even physically immigrating. So would it make sense that you held on to your customs even tighter and for a longer period of time and more generations than a group of people who's actually physically removed, sent across oceans, right? Especially at a timeline when it's harder to long distance communicate. You see what I'm getting at? All of that, like, you just got to put all that in context and kind of go, man, to me, just that's the match. So, and it just adds up like to other things, right? It's all, to me, this is part of the conversion process. It's like they've converted you, but they want to keep you in line. So this is kind of like modern Christianity in America, where I'm like, who else is there to preach to? Like, when people like the word of Jesus, I'm like, who hasn't heard it? If you grow up in the United States, by the time you're 2, you're going to know about Jesus. It's like, it's there somewhere. You're never going to see the word Buddha or Zarathustra, but you're going to see Jesus. You're going to see that. So it's there. So you gotta ask yourself, like, why do we even still have churches if everybody's long ago transitioned? Well, I kind of look at most religion today in America, and I'm like, they're just constantly like cajoling people. They're constantly trying to do what? Like rope them back in, keep them in the flock. That's how I'm viewing the cult of Columbia. They still call the yeah, and I listen, and I've picked up on so much the last few years, uh, listening to you guys and your different. And it's funny because I guess it just became a thing in the overall culture. You know, there's the so-called gender war and all that. Again, I think they broke that out in the '60s. That they foment stuff like that, right? And they make it work. And then of course the laws, the way so you used to have, women had no power in the 1800s. You got to read this stuff. So if I'm an indigenous woman and I got a history of powerful, independent, that big mama Jemima running the whole plantation, running the whole farm, being in charge of all the logistics, right? That's that's what is in your DNA, but also going to be what people are talking about. They're going to be telling old stories. Remember when? I don't know how excited am I about being a member of the European Protestant Christian Methodist denomination that's making me wear, the aprons. I mean, go look at the pictures of whatever. So, yeah, right. They needed this cult to like keep on your ass. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I think gold is. I think it's designed by European elite who are probably working with converted mixed indigenous elite, right? Because they know what they're concocting here. They're putting together some special ingredients with this cult and they roll it out. And it starts very swarthy, very Amazonian warrior princess like in the 1760s. By the time you get to the 1810, 1820, she's becoming white. And then you get the Monroe Doctrine, 1824. I was reading you poems about Columbia just now from 1820. 1824 is the official public manifest destiny. And who's supposed to go west? Go look at the painting. She's white going west. But what does it show? It shows white European pioneers. But who's right next to them on the other side of the road beckoning them? They admit to this. So the painting, indigenous Indians. So you can go look up different artwork of the era and you can see the artwork. It's motif, I call it, evolve and adjust as the population that exists in the United States changes and adjusts. And you can see it mirroring slowly but surely European light-skinned complexioned whitening coming on, until you finally have the ultimate whitening, which is the Civil War victory, and they start bringing us in mass, and they shelve Columbia totally and give us Lady Liberty. So you go from a fierce, swarthy Amazonian matriarchal warrior goddess with spears, sometimes shields, also like the olive branch, but cornucopia often. So abundance plus judgment plus martial values, right? That's in 17. So by 8, so literally almost, I forget when the Statue of Liberty comes on, it's like 1880 something. But think about this for a second. Basically, at about the 100-year mark, it's run its course. The demographics have changed. The indigenous have been so beaten down in every which way you can think of. They're pulling in at that point about 400 to 500,000 Europeans, okay, a year. This is the beginning of Ellis Island in Galveston, Texas. And all of a sudden you got Lady Liberty looking out, sort of not arms outstretched, but welcoming, looking out, looking a little more academic, I would almost say, and androgynous, I would say. I mean, Statue of Liberty could definitely be a man. So the goddess Columbia was all female, man. That was a woman. So again, these things matter, right? And today you can still go in or go look it up online. But if you ever do get to visit the Capitol, they still have two paintings in there. And they still, it's still of Columbia. I think one's Columbia. They called it Freedom on top, but the two of Columbia, they show her in that early martial indigenous aspect. And then concomitant with the Civil War, they put what they call the new dome on the DC Capitol. And the story is a black man, Mason, was the main guy that concocted the statue, which they then start calling, I think they call it the Statue of Freedom. She looks awfully like the Amazonian martial goddess. So kind of interesting, like to watch it, how they're using it. Again, you have what they're going to call an ex-African slave involved in that. I got a whole bunch of stuff on all that. But my point is you can see them holding on to it through the Civil War, but obviously during Reconstruction, you got these Prussians, German, Saxons who financed the whole thing, who were taking over everything, kindergarten, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Clausewitz, right? All that stuff is Prussian and Saxon and German in culture, and it all comes in during and then after the Civil War. That's where you get the hardcore eugenics. It comes with these Prussians. It comes with these Germans. All right, so when you start getting the hardcore cranial analysis, all right, that stuff begins after the Civil War, after the Union, after the abolitionists win. Then you get Black Codes. Then you get Ku Klux Klan. Then you get evolution. Then you get they're measuring your cranium. Then you get the 5 type. You know, it's all you see what I'm getting at? Like there's a certain group, in my view, that won that war, and it's not the only war that they won. They won other wars around the world. Okay, you get what I'm getting at here? Okay, and yeah, they're setting up things, and they might have their tiffs, their intermittent tiffs, but they're all on the U.S. dollar to buy oil. They're all buying the U.S. debt no matter what. They're all, you get my drift? Now, one of these countries has the land held in collective for the benefit of its citizens, to my knowledge, not even China. They call it the People's Bank of China, but I believe that is held in trust to the Chinese Communist Party. Just saying that nobody right now lives in a nation state that practices remotely the types of like ancient economic system laws. We're so far, we have no idea what we're missing, including the descendants. That's why I tell a lot of, because we talk a lot of people. I'm like, man, at this point, because it's overwhelming. Okay, you're from here, but at the end of the day, like, who really cares? What were you doing different? Please God, if it was better, tell us, because we're all, like if you look around, regardless of skin complexion, man, people know, couldn't things be a little easier, more abundant? Well, does it really have to be this hard? Just saying. That's not for me. I'm going to stick to my focus overall. But yeah, there you go. Your grandma, she rented land to the farm. Yeah, right. So, right. Freedom Image Bureau notes, they were using your ancestors to train the white Europeans coming in during Reconstruction how to farm. Anyhow, there's a lot to it. There's so many neat things about that I could go into. I think I'm going to do a report on Reconstruction just to put together what I've already studied. It's really fascinating, and it really shows. I'll give you one more example, and I'll close out because this is fascinating stuff, guys. During Reconstruction, there's a lawsuit because a European farmer. So when she's talking about, so they're bringing in all these Europeans now. They don't know how to they don't know how to farm, man. You gotta go read where they're from. They're from so they're coming in and they're making the so-called ex-African slaves, now called freedmen, actually train them a lot of time. But really, what's happening is those guys would also, like she's saying, also these guys would quote unquote own the land, but they don't know what they're doing, right? So they'd have a contract with your ancestors, and your ancestor was the operator. Sound familiar? I mean, I can go throughout corporations. I'm like, many of corporations don't actually like do anything. It's like crazy. Anyhow, that's what's really going on even after the Civil War with the freedmen. And at this point, there's a court case because of one season the crop failed or whatever, right? And the indigenous person, now called a freedman, the guys that were running this guy's farm, they did not use the new Farmer's Almanac that was getting published since like the late or the early 1800s. It might be the late 1700s. Okay. So what you see in that move is that they held the freedmen liable for the crop failure. So that gives you a sense right there of how valuable the freedmen were in Reconstruction, because nobody knows how to farm it but them, not right away, because they got $14 trillion in equivalent modern dollar debt to pay off to win that war. $14 trillion. and they're going to pay it off by making food, right, for their own people, and then making all that cotton and making other shit, pitch tar, and exporting it, and then making money, and then paying the income tax, and then that income tax goes to pay down the debt. So the freedmen, so the reason I'm pointing out that case is that also shows how powerful your people still were in the South, that they were actually operating like hybrid. They were on the European system. They were forcing more of the cut and dry and monoculture, but you were practicing a lot of your customs and your way of doing it. And what they do in that court case is they're like, if you want to be able to get crop insurance, and that way, if the crop goes bad one season, the insurer pays you money. If you want that crop insurance, you have to follow the approved Farmer's Almanac. So you see what they do. Now you can no longer practice indigenous farming. Not if you want to do business in the new system. See, that doesn't take a gun. That doesn't take a sheriff. All that takes is the letter of the law and the banks and the insurers saying, nah, we're not gonna. So they would prefer that everybody do farming techniques that might not be optimal, because what they really care about is having it all accounted for so they can get their dividend. That's why we don't have the best agricultural system in the world in terms of productivity. Because if you add in all the pollution, all this, you have to net that out against like, oh, look, we can produce, 10 pounds of potatoes on 1 inch of soil because we're throwing all this shit in it. It's like, okay, gotcha. Meanwhile, you can't use like all the, you can't fish the water, right? Well, now the community can't feed itself. Right. I'm just pointing these things out, like just things to think about, even our own world. Right. And then wrap it back to, it's not that unbelievable what I'm saying about what was going on in Reconstruction with the freedmen. Once you realize they're not a bunch of Africans, they're a bunch of people who've been here forever, working this land, and the skills and the talent and the know-how gets passed down in the best way possible, not through book learning, but on the job training from the beginning, OJT, right? That's exactly the mess. That's again, doctrine of discovery, right? So they get rid of doctrine of discovery. So after the Civil War, they get rid of all this stuff on paper, and then they just redo it to your people with different types of laws. And everybody keeps falling for it. We're going to call you a freedman, but we just absconded with all your wealth when we decimated the Freedmen's Bank. But you're going to go ahead and teach this European over here who has a mortgage on the property, but he doesn't know how to farm. You're going to run the farm for him, because God damn it, we need to sell shit. We need for export because we need income, because we need to pay taxes, because if we don't, we already got enough Germans here. Why are there so many German Americans? It's just, yeah, just moved. They just moved all the book. Right. So what right, exactly. So the way I view black codes, and then, around the country, and then after the Civil War, they implement them in the South. It's just, you're not allowed to be an Indian. So it's like, get on the train, Stan. If you're not going to get on the train, we're going to lynch you. We're going to kill you. We're going to go after you. And then even if you are on it, because you waited so long to get on it, we're going to punt. You're going to be a second-class citizen. You see, there's a lot too, that the way they treated the indigenous of the South out of the Civil War. Because you see, they were the holdouts. Yeah, you got to think about this stuff. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot. So thanks for joining me again. You can check this out. I got a 58-page fully sourced case study, Goddess Columbia, social reengineering the converted Indians. Because I believe the converted Indians were a big, big, big percentage, perhaps the majority percentage of the citizenry, of the colonists. And I believe that is pretty steady Eddie until about the 1820s. After this war of 1812 to 18, something goes on there, and there's some agreement, whatever changes, and now they're going to really start pushing trust corporate employed Europeans over en masse, middle managers, family farmers, and all that. That's the real beginning of that. That's not going on like they try and tell us in the 16 and 1700. That is not going on there. There's no receipts for that. I can find plenty of immigration numbers, though, at least in the 1800s, that show like the numbers increasing. But by the way, they don't get into like the 200,000s in 1 year from Europe until 1840. Again, what do you think about that? For the most part, it's 50,000. It's 50 to 80 to 80 to 100, and it kind of creeps up. So, who was here then? But before the the 1820s, doing everything. So, again, check it out at the site or join for free. Get access to a lot of reports I put up there. I got some great do-it-yourself family research genealogical guides. They're informed. They're how-to manuals informed by this. Like the reason I find different, sources of lineage and of identity, right? These different ledgers is through knowing the real system, the financial system, and the legal system, because finance and legal always have a big paper trail, big paper process. They do it to themselves, like you're pointing out, right? The Constitution, everything's getting written down. Right? Okay, well now we can see your process by getting all the paper and knowing the sequence of the paper. Yeah, none of it's American, that's for sure. I don't even know how much of it is English. Like at some point, like where did they really bring? I feel like this stuff comes into Great Britain from the Mediterranean. It's all part of the Iberian hive. They talk about Italian and Turkish-looking men who look like Turkish professors and scholars coming over, and they're the first lawyers. Yeah, it's definitely strange. What it's all about, for sure. But they apply where they get control, right? That is exact same. So Great Britain, the United States, I think some of the Caribbean, right? Like the British Caribbean islands. I think we'll see this exact same, SOP. So have a good evening. Thanks for joining me again. It's American Ancestry Decoded. Check it out on the web, YouTube, and or TikTok. Thank you. As always, remembrance conquers oblivion.